you look at everyone and you recognize your shared humanity. And then from that, you choose, okay, what's my solutionary path going to be? What can I do to make a positive difference? What problem can I solve?
We've learned how to argue, to persuade, to win or to lose, but we've forgotten how to see each other. We really have forgotten. And when we lose that, conflict stops being productive and starts becoming destructive. You don't have to agree with everything everybody's saying or feeling, but just seeing each other as a human being, something shifts in you. Defensiveness softens, curiosity opens, and new possibilities emerge. Understanding the world really begins with understanding how I show up within it. We've created a world where disagreement quickly becomes dehumanization.
I'm Zoe Weil, and this is Solutionary Voices, a podcast brought to you by the Institute for Humane Education, an organization dedicated to building a more just, compassionate, and healthy world for all people, animals, and the ecosystems that sustain life. On this podcast, we bring together guests on the forefront of addressing local and global challenges and whose lives, ideas, and actions we hope will inspire you to find your own solutionary path. Today, I'm speaking with Shirin Karsan, a woman whose wisdom, generosity, and equanimity are born of surmounting enormous challenges. Shirin fled her home country of Uganda when then-President Idi Amin declared that South Asians could no longer live there. Her large family were citizens, but each had to flee, not always together. Shirin left by herself at age 14. A refugee first in the UK and then in Canada, she wouldn't see her parents for 18 months. Fast forward to now. Shirin and her husband Rudy, whom I also interviewed on this podcast, emigrated again, this time to the United States, where, among other things, Shirin works to welcome and support other immigrants coming to America. Shirin is an unwavering advocate for global peace, dignity, and justice. She's a bridge builder who has chaired the Peace Action Network of YPO, the Young Presidents Organization. She's a force for good, and she's my friend. Welcome, Shirin.
Thank you, Zoe. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, always the first question of this podcast, what problem are you working to solve?
Yeah, so when I was thinking of that, there are so many problems I would like to solve out there, right? We all would. But I think for me, it's what do I have control over? So I really landed on that I think the problem I'm really trying to solve now is how I matter in relationship to anything else. I think that we don't fully understand ourselves in relation to others. And so we experience the world as something happening to us rather than something we're actively participating in that's unfolding, right? We move through the world thinking we're independent, but we're constantly influencing and shaping each other. Without realizing it, we bring our biases, our assumptions, our past experiences into every interaction. It's like everything we experience, whether it's collaboration or it's conflict, I feel like that emerges from that. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we don't exist in isolation. We exist in relationship. So every thought we have, every decision we make, every reaction we feel is shaped in connection, I think, to other people, right? Like from the minute we're conceived, living in a mother's or nowadays in anybody's womb, because technology allows us to do that, to the time we die, we are reliant on an external source to birth us, bury us, cremate us, whatever it might be. And yet, we move through the world as if we're our own separate entity. maybe believing that our perspectives are objective, maybe believing that our actions don't ripple outward. But the truth is, we are truly deeply interdependent, and we shape each other constantly. So we're more interconnected than we are aware of, and responsible more than we might like to admit, which to me, a long-winded way of answering your question, means understanding the world really begins with understanding how I show up within it.
That's beautiful. It makes me want to ask this next question about how your own experiences as an immigrant and a refugee shaped your values, your beliefs, your work, your actions, and how you show up in the world and how you interact with others and how you are interdependent.
We have our own narratives, but none of that exists in isolation. It depends so much on what's happening around us, who you are relating to, whether it be me leaving Uganda because of one leader's decision that affected, 70,000 people, or whether it be in our own families, in our own communities, right? I can give you an example. You know that I was working at Drexel University, running a program there, and I was sending students to African villages, and this was in Mozambique and in the Gambia. And the reason for doing this is we were doing service learning projects. And in doing that, preparing, and these were biomedical engineering students, I offered them to take on something called a $2 a day challenge. So knowing that more than 60% of our population lives under $2 a day, these are American kids, they have their experiences living in America, living in Philadelphia in this case, and now they're preparing to go and live for 6 or 7 weeks in a small African village, which is a kind of village that I grew up in. That can be a shock to the system. So how do you prepare a student who is an undergrad student, 18, 19, 20-year-old? So this offer of taking the $2 challenge was over a few days. And it was really intended for them to experience what that would be like. So they would have no phones, they would have no running water, they could not ask their friends for food. They had to actually experience what it would be like. How do you do that in a city? Well, you go out and you go to the CVS, which is our local drugstore, or you go to any shop and you ask them to give you anything that they can that helps you build your house. So we're staying overnight in this field. You're building these cardboard homes, right? That becomes your shelter for the night, which they managed to do. But they would have to go and beg for food. They weren't allowed to take any handouts from their fellow students. I was there doing this with them. They had running water for 1 hour, which is the time that they would cook their food or wash up or whatever they needed that water for, one pot. And there were about 20 students who were all doing this. So they quickly figured out buying their own meals is only going to take them so far. But if they do this collectively as a group and buy pasta, then that pasta dinner is going to go a lot further for them. So quickly understanding that relationship with each other, how that's going to help each other. There were so many aspects of this, right? But I think the exercise was incredibly profound for them, stepping into this very different lived reality, right? But the most interesting part is what happened in the conversations after. And that's what has stayed with me, right? The students started noticing their own assumptions, their own blind spots, and even how they see the world and how they see each other differently. You bring students who've known each other, you put them in an environment which is a pretty stressful environment, and you ask them to do something that they've never done before. In the conversation, something shifted. And I think that's when it really struck me. Like, we don't naturally know how to see each other. That's really something we actually have to learn. I think that shift from this is happening to me to how am I a part of this? That's when everything starts to change. How am I going to impact the other person? If I do this, if I go and buy at that time, I think it was like a 15-cent banana from Trader Joe's, I'll have it myself. But if I go get a bag of pasta, I can have 4 other people share this with me, and we can stretch that dollar further, right? So you start thinking about that ripple effect that happens in your decision making.
What did you learn in the process of doing this very brave experiment with your students?
I'll put it to you this way. I've started thinking of this as almost like relational mirrors, right? When I'm alone, I can feel very grounded. I can feel very clear on things. I can be calm. I can be centered, right? But the moment I'm in interaction with somebody else, especially if there's tension or difference, suddenly I see parts of myself that I didn't notice before. And it's uncomfortable, right? But it's also incredibly revealing. So those mirrors, like imagine going shopping for a dress you want to buy for an event, right? You go into the store and you see that 3-way mirror and you're looking at yourself from every angle, right? Those mirrors are revealing kind of, things, showing you things that you don't necessarily want to see or remember that that's a part of you, right? So it's like it's showing me my reactions. It's showing me my assumptions. It's showing me parts of myself that I didn't see before. And that relationship just doesn't just connect us, it reflects us. Just like those mirrors reflect what we're actually seeing about ourselves. And I think we often experience things that we don't want to see about ourselves, but actually something in us is becoming visible that we didn't know we had. We don't see that in isolation. We only see that part of the mirror that you look at normally, right, or usually. But all of a sudden, you now have all these parts and all these angles. I mean, even when we're walking in nature, we're meditating, we're just hanging out there, we may feel aligned and we think, yeah, I've got this. This is me. This is me looking at the mirror. This is you looking at me right now. And we can handle this, right? But the moment we encounter another person or a challenging situation, it could be, you walking in nature, and I know you're surrounded by nature, but you could be at peace out there and you could get a bee sting or a mosquito bite. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what just happened? Something shifts, even if it's in nature, right? Your energy changes. You react to it. Sometimes you can get triggered by what happens, right? I don't think in a relationship with another person, that trigger, that reaction is a failure or something bad. I think that's actually information that we can learn from. Because what's happening in that moment is that our inner world, my inner world, is meeting somebody else's inner world. And suddenly, all the things that we weren't aware of, our assumptions, our sensitivities, our expectations, they come alive. So I've come to see that we don't really know ourselves in isolation. And that's why I say that. We really get to know ourselves in relationship. Those moments of disruption, not interruptions necessarily. I'm starting to think of them as invitations. They're showing us something about how we're wired, how we perceive, how we engage. Instead of asking, why is this person or this mosquito or bee sting really affecting me? I think the more interesting question becomes, what is this interaction revealing about me and how I handle that situation?
So that is so beautiful. And I've had many a bee sting and mosquito bite. And there are a few things here that I want to pull the threads of a little bit. One is the difference between reacting and responding. So maybe I'll ask you to answer that question first. And then I want to zoom out. So for you, what is this difference between reacting and responding?
I think when I think about it, it's a realization that most of us were never really taught how to be in a relationship, not with others, sometimes not even with ourselves. We move through the world carrying that thing that we pick up during our years on earth, right? The biases, the assumptions, the stories, but we're constantly shaping each other. I think what's happening is when my inner world is meeting your inner world or somebody else's inner world, I don't know everything. When we're talking and you might be asking me a question, it's almost like I'm already forming a response without letting you finish what you're saying. And that realization makes me think like you're already making a decision of what you want to say. That, I think, is something that maybe happens to a lot of people. I know it happens to me, but I think creating that awareness in myself that that is happening, I think that's when you start differentiating. And it's the way we're wired. So why is this person affecting me, or why am I getting affected?
It's funny, it made me think of, I forget who said this, but there's speaking and then there's waiting to speak. And that period of time where you're in a conversation and you realize, oh, am I listening, or am I just formulating my responses over and over, waiting to respond? So that was really interesting that you brought that up. Okay, I want to zoom out because you were the chair of the Peace Action Network at YPO, and you've been trying to build peace for a long time. And I'd love to hear the connection between this inner recognition of relationships and their importance. And I'm wondering how we bring what you're inviting us to think about into the world to reduce conflict and violence and build more peace.
Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, there's so many problems I'd like to solve, world peace being one of them. But of course, that's not happening. I mean, like you mentioned, there's actually about over 50 conflicts happening all around the world right now, possibly more, that we might not even be aware of. And this is something, there are two things that we talk about in the Peace Action Network. One is that how can you be at peace with others when you're not at peace with yourself, right? If you don't have that inner peace, you can't have peace with your spouse. You can't have peace with your family, your parents, your children, right? How can you be a global business leader and understand what your employees are dealing with if you don't have this sense of awareness, right? And the other thing is we talk a lot about conflict and polarization. We live in a world that is certainly very divided and very polarized at so many levels, right? So conflict, for example, conflict is natural. It's the way we relate to conflict that we need to really think about. We've created a world where disagreement quickly becomes dehumanization. And that breakdown is costly for us. It shows up in geopolitics, in boardrooms, in families, and within ourselves again, right? Where people stop seeing each other and start defending their identities or their ideologies and their positions, right? But what I've come to realize is that solving any problem starts much closer to home again. It starts with understanding ourselves, our biases, our triggers. How do we create spaces where people can stay in connection, even when they profoundly disagree? I recently, and I think you know that I went to the Cannes Film Festival, again, as part of the Peace Action Network. I was running this program. So we brought together filmmakers, producers, directors, business leaders, as well as academics. And we did this for 3 days in beautiful Cannes during the time of the film festival. We're surrounded by glitz and glamour, right? But in that, we created this oasis of bringing people together to talk about how can we amplify our voices of peace building through film. In all the people, there were about 40 of us in the room, and I decided to run this activity. Everybody that was there, and these are people, and like I said, we had movie producers, directors, funders, we had global business executives, academics in the room, those who shape narrative, those who finance it, those who study it. These are people from all around the world. Most people didn't know each other. And in that activity, I asked them, just quietly, for a full minute, just look into each other's eyes. No talking, no judgment. Just truly see each other. Boy, was it uncomfortable. I mean, it's very unnatural. We don't do that, right? People were like, what do you mean? Like, you could see them fidgeting, and eventually they calmed down, and you could see them. You could see them really looking into each other's eyes. And you felt that deep connection. It was so powerful. And just the idea of truly feeling connected, it kind of carried the tone of the next 3 days, right? You don't have to agree with everything everybody's saying or feeling, but just seeing each other as a human being, something shifts in you. Defensiveness softens, curiosity opens, and new possibilities emerge. And sometimes it's just as simple as asking, wow, what am I missing when I don't see a person? And what's my role in helping them see me? And those small moments of awareness can completely change the trajectory of any interaction. And it really changed our interactions with each other. Just that sense of understanding we're all human. We come from different parts of the world. We had people from Vienna, Singapore, Ethiopia, Argentina, all over the place, India, right? We were all seeing each other as human beings. And that quality changes the way I listen, the way I respond, and the way I lead. Because we're not just reacting to situations. Now we're reacting to each other through this different lens. And the more I do this work, the more I realize, again, we're not in isolation. We're always surrounded by people. We're constantly shaping each other through the way we listen and the way we show up.
Absolutely. And it's an exercise I've experienced myself a number of times, and that I've also led with our graduate students at the Institute for Humane Education when we've come together for an in-person residency week. I did this recently Another guest that we had on the podcast, Michelle Culver, who runs the Rhythm Project, she had put together a summit on human connection in the time of AI. And I was paired for this eye contact exercise with a 16-year-old girl. It was 2 minutes. And the whole time, just tears were streaming down my face. And I will never forget this 16-year-old girl. I will love her. She will have a place in my heart for as long as I live. And all we did was look into each other's eyes. I mean, we later had a conversation as well, but it's so deep and powerful. And I'm so glad you brought it up, because it's something that any member of our audience right now could do. I would encourage anybody who's in this audience right now to try it. If we could just look into each other's eyes, like the thought that we would harm each other after that experience, it seems sort of impossible. How we, bring a solutionary lens to amplifying this on a global scale so we can use this kind of deep connection to avoid not conflict, as you say, but war and violence. That's a real solutionary question. I don't know if you have an answer for that. If you do, I'd love to hear it.
Rudy also did this exercise, and it was an odd number of people. So I said, I sort of stepped back, and then I realized there was a young girl who was helping at the bar. And I just went over to her and I said, do you mind if we do this together, right? And she really just kind of stepped back and she looked at me like, why are you involving me in this? I'm not part of this, right? I have a job to do here. I'm like, no, it's okay. I held her hands, right? I said, just go with it if you don't mind. Trust me. I held her hands. I looked at her and we started laughing. She started laughing and I said, yeah, I know. And eventually she calmed down and I could feel her whole body relax. And she just we both started crying, like you said. Imagine what we hear about kids that get caught up and the innocent lives that get caught up in whatever is happening in our world, right? Imagine looking into the eyes of those kids. How, like you said, how could you ever think to harm anybody? And the thing about this and this activity that made me feel like these patterns don't just exist in small moments. You can scale them, right? And the dynamics show up in leadership, in organizations, in groups that you go to, we go to, we've gone to together. Sometimes I think we have this growing inability as humans to stay connected in the presence of difference. We've learned how to argue, to persuade, to win or to lose, but we've forgotten how to see each other. We really have forgotten. And when we lose that, conflict stops being productive and starts becoming destructive. That's where it matters. So that's where in my work, I keep thinking about helping people rediscover a different way of engaging where conflict becomes a doorway, not a divide. We think we're reacting to situations, but again, we're really reacting to each other through our own lens. And the more aware we become of that, the more intentional we can be on how we engage.
Growing up in New York City, I got so used to it, I just stopped seeing other people who were suffering. It's not impossible, however, to do what you're suggesting, which is that you look at everyone and you recognize your shared humanity. And then from that, you choose, okay, what's my solutionary path going to be? What can I do to make a positive difference? What problem can I solve?
I live in the heart of the city, and you start recognizing some of the people because you see them all the time, right? I've made the mistake of giving people money, and I've learned that there are reasons that I don't want to encourage giving them money for, because they're either going to go and buy a drink or, God knows what else. That's not what I want to encourage. Whether I'm right in that or wrong, I don't know. But that's sort of my way of deciding. But I will always, and we have so many food trucks around the corners on the city streets, right? So if I see somebody, then I always offer them, can I get you a coffee, or can I get you some food or something? And then that's how I can help them. But it also took me back to the story I shared initially with my students, right? When we built, and we literally, I wish I had a picture to show you, but we literally built our house, our shelter of cardboard boxes, right? And they managed to get some tape, and it was a very, very unstable shelter. And there were about 9 of us sleeping under it. And it was a wet, rainy night. And in the middle of the night, and we were in a university, and we we're in a very urban campus, right? So there were some students out there that must have been at a party or something. And in the middle of the night, it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, you could hear these kids, and I couldn't sleep very much because I was like, I was with my students, and I had this sense of responsibility, and I could hear these students coming down, and they were laughing, and all of a sudden, they started kicking our shelter. The next thing you know, the shelter's gone, and all the kids are like exposed to this rain, and all I could do is tell them to go to their dorms, because I didn't want them sitting out in the rain and getting sick. And they didn't know where we were going to meet the next day, right? They weren't allowed phones, and they all, to their credit, they all honored that. And then when we were getting together again, we eventually got together on the site where we had made our home. We rebuilt another shelter, but then we always have our reflections. And in the reflections, I shared with them something that you also referenced in your introduction of me, was my journey of leaving Uganda, right? And I'm the youngest of 11 siblings, and my family was separated in 8 different countries. I was sharing that with these students. I'm like, this is what it took me back to. I lost my home. My family, which was the students, were all separated. I didn't know where they went. I didn't know whether they were going to come back again the next day. And I didn't know where we were going to sleep the next night, because we were out there for 4 or 5 nights or so. And our food and, all our stuff was destroyed. Just drawing those parallels also for those students was such a profound lesson, which I just wanted to share with you because I knew you would appreciate it. And just, lessons that come to us in so many different ways, right? That we carry with us.
Oh my goodness. I'm just imagining those students today and what you offered them through that $2 a day experiment and what they learned, to have fellow students knock down their cardboard shelter in the middle of the night. I wonder if any of them have been back in touch with you over the years about that experience. And I cannot help but think that experience has shaped each one of their futures. And it gets back to what you were saying at the beginning, that, we bring our experiences, our life experiences, to who we are, to our relationships, to everything. And that activity, that exercise, that experience will always be with them. They'll tell their children and their grandchildren and what they learned from it. It's so profound.
And we are in touch. And in fact, a lot of the students went on to becoming doctors, and they asked me to write their references for them, which I was happy to do. They're amazing, amazing students. But remember, the intention of that activity and that exercise was for them to really understand what was happening in their own backyard, where they had come from different places around the world. Also, Drexel's a very international university, but a lot of them are Americans, right? And we have a neighborhood which we refer to as West Philly, which is not the best of neighborhoods. It's a tough one. But if they were going to go and live in a small village in Africa and go with the intention of doing service, and these students were going to be building biomedical engineering equipment, which, in a small village in the Gambia, for example, women would walk for miles and miles coming to have a delivery, and they're usually in labor when they're walking these miles, coming to a hospital only to find that the equipment is not working. And so we were training these students. There was no biomedical engineering department in there. There were only 2 biomedical engineers in the whole country at the time. And so our students were going to help teach them, but they ended up learning in the process, right? And so taking them from a city of Philadelphia into the Drexel neighborhood, into West Philly, experiencing living like a homeless person, essentially, living under $2 a day, which is what they were going to see a lot of people doing when they went to live in those villages, right? They couldn't have just gone and lived there. They would not have understood, and it would not have been, I've lived in a village. I could not in clear conscience have sent them there into that system, into that cultural shock, right? Because, and you know this so well, you're talking about solutionary aspects of education, right? That takes preparation too. And so going and living in these villages with families who have no idea. They've never been outside of that village. They don't know what a cell phone is. They don't know what a laptop is. They don't, they're looking at American clothes for the first time. They're likely looking at a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person for the first time, right? There's a language barrier. There's so many barriers there. The food is different. That takes preparation. And for my students to go into a situation like that, they had to go through those steps of understanding before they could really do the teaching. And like I said, they thought they're American students, they're going to do, a lot of teaching and helping. They are the ones that came back learning way more than they anticipated from a culture that has so little of material possessions, right? And everything is communal and a true village. And that was so beautiful to see. And that has definitely shaped their lives.
Just you talking about this is a reminder of the power of education. So this podcast is from the Institute for Humane Education, and my life's work has been in education, and you've just so beautifully articulated education's power. So thank you for that. And, I'm guessing audience members have a sense that you're a fairly adventurous person, because this was an adventurous thing to do. But I'm also guessing that they might be surprised to learn that you're a pilot. And I was surprised to learn that you were a pilot. I don't know that many pilots. I just know a couple. And I'm curious what compelled you to be a pilot. And also, when we get back to that question of reacting and responding, you have quite a story about a time when you were a pilot. You had to deal with an emergency, and you responded rather than react. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that journey.
Wow. I didn't expect to be going there, but yeah, I love talking about that. So I will. Your first question, why a pilot? So you know what? Actually, I lived in a very small village in Uganda, And then my parents, who would still stay in the village, but one of my sisters would take a few of our younger kids to the town, and that's where we would go to school. In that town, it was a very small town, maybe like 1,500 people living there, maybe a little more. There's like a dip, there's a valley, and then across you would see this little dirt strip, which was the local, we used to call it the aerodrome. And that's where the small planes would come and land and take off. And I was always fascinated by that. But I never imagined, I mean, this whole idea of being expelled out of Uganda. Luckily, we were brought up under the British Commonwealth, so we were studying in English. So to me, leaving Uganda was like going to a place of my books and adventures that I had in my books that I had only read about. And all of a sudden, I'm going to London at Christmas time and going to see snow for the first time and Santa Claus and all of that, right? Flying was one of those things that I forgot about until years later when I met with a friend, and we'd gone out to a cottage for the weekend, and we were looking at a magazine, and he said, "Oh boy, I wish I had a plane. I would love to fly." And I said, "Oh my God, I would love to learn how to fly too." And so we started talking about it, and he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to see what it means to buy a little plane and learn take flying lessons." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to look into flying lessons." So we left that weekend, and Monday morning I started looking into it, and there's a Brandywine Airport very close to where I was living, and I went and I made an appointment. I spoke to somebody, and I signed up for flying lessons. And then, by the way, my friend, I met him like years later. I'm like, "Are you flying yet?" He's like, "No, I'm not." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm way into taking my lessons. What happened? Like, we were supposed to do this together." When I got my license, I realized that telling people I was taking flying lessons or that I was a pilot, like, it just opened up a conversation. And all of a sudden, I had something to talk about, other than, sadly, that I am a mother taking care of my kids at home. But all of a sudden, having this and that, a lot of men wanted to like, wow, that would be so amazing to do. I haven't done it. How did you manage to do that as a woman, right? So that was my entry into flying. And I would take my girls, my family, most of my family is in Toronto. So driving from Philadelphia to Toronto could be an 8, 10, 11-hour drive. So I started flying them to Toronto, and that would be like 2 hours. I would be from Philadelphia to Toronto, where I would have to do my customs at a local airport. And then to come back to Philadelphia, I would have to go into Buffalo Airport because that's the first American entry point. So I'd stop there, clear customs, and then I could fly to Philadelphia. And one of those days that I was flying in, it was a beautiful day. And I tried to land my plane, and I was talking to air traffic control, and they said, "You're lined up for the major runway. Do you want to just go and land there?" And I'm like, "Okay, sure, I'll go and land there. It's fine. They've cleared me for it." But when I was trying to land, I couldn't because my plane started shaking. And we were trained to, you feel like there's something wrong, you abort the landing and you go around again, which I did. And as I came back around the second time, by that time, whatever is happening, you kind of should have had a way to resolve, and then you can try landing again. I tried landing again, and my plane still started shaking. And then another training is that you'd rather be on the ground than be up in the air and face a disaster in the air for obvious reasons. So I did something called a forced landing. And my two girls were in the plane with me, and they were 11 and 14 at the time, right? So my focus was obviously to keep everybody safe, to keep my girls safe, to land the plane safely, to make sure that everybody around the airport and other planes are safe. And that's my focus. So that's what you train for, right? It's in a plane, it's a life and death situation. And in this case, I did a forced landing. I closed down Buffalo Airport because of that, but at least everybody was safe. And this is where your training comes in and the focus comes in. And I've had two in-flight engine failures beyond that time as well, where I was the pilot, right? But that's what you get trained for. Focus, remember what you're trained for and what they're telling you to do, and safety first. And I'm happy to be alive and talking about it today.
Likewise. And what was the reason that your plane was shaking?
So what we learned is that it was such a perfectly beautiful day, and a 747 had just landed on the runway that I was coming into. So there's wake turbulence. Just like you have in a boat, you get to see that wake turbulence. In an airplane, you don't always get to see it because it's in the air. So the first time I came around, I was I was right in the line of that wake turbulence, and I was feeling it.
I know that you are an Ismaili Muslim and that your faith is very important to you. And I'm curious how you feel like your faith has shaped much of your life's work and all that you've shared with us today.
My faith is very much based on several values and ethical aspects. Education is extremely strong. In fact, this will be interesting to you, and we were always brought up sort of thinking, the way of thinking is this: if you have two children, one is a boy and one is a girl, and you can only educate one of them, educate the girl, because the girls are the ones that are usually the ones giving birth, becoming a mother, holding the family together. And if you educate a woman, that education is going to ripple through the family, which always stood with me. And the second thing is service. Ever since you are taught, help in whatever way you can. If it's taking a glass of water to your grandmother or an elderly person. In Uganda, every Friday, a lot of the homeless people would come around the town, and you always take out something for them to eat. You know what a roti is, right? Okay, so we were always told, even if you have one roti left in your house, give half to the one who really needs it, because they need it more than you need it. So that's the kind of service ethic that we grew up with. My father always, and my mother, you got to help you, even if it's holding somebody's hand to help them cross the street. That ethic of service has always stayed with me, and I've volunteered from ever since I can remember. All the work that I do now is all voluntary work. It's really interesting when the dean of the School of Biomedical Engineering, I was working at Drexel University in nanotechnology, and then I took a year off. I got my Fulbright scholarship. I went to the Middle East. The dean of the School of Biomedical Engineering had just met me before I left. We knew each other, but we hadn't really had a conversation, but she found out I was an Ismaili Muslim. And she was a Turkish Muslim. And she said to me, I want you to run this program that I have actually been talking about, the service learning. We called it We Serve. And she said, I want you to run it. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm going away for a year, so I'm not going to be able to do it. She said, you are the person that's going to run it. And I thought, okay, she's just saying this because a year, I mean, I know how anxious she is to start this. I'm going to be gone for a year. But she waited for me. And she would continuously write to me, and she said, like, we're planning ahead. And the minute, I told her, okay, I'm coming back, and I think it was like June 10th or something. And she said, okay, great. I'll see you next week. You're starting next week. I'm like, what? I've just come back from being away for a year, not to mention that I just gone through like a diagnosis of breast cancer, gone through chemo, and I'd gone away because I just wanted to have this opportunity. I want to spend some time at home with the family. She says, of course you can, but you're coming into work. and she got me onto this program, and it's been the best experience of my life because she understood, like you do, how much education from an experiential perspective and the power of that. That's what she wanted in her students. I actually have a picture right up here about me because, I learned so much from her, and her ability to allow me to do this with my students was just, I learned so much from it. And I know how many, we put maybe 300 students through this program over a 6-year period, right? And experiential learning and interdisciplinary education became so important in this program. I just loved that opportunity.
I feel so excited for the audience to have gotten to meet you and to hear all of these stories. And I have one final question for you. What would you like your epitaph to be?
Honestly, nothing. Nothing. I'll be gone. Somebody else will come, and they'll bring their own learnings and their own lens. I'm just so grateful that I have had this experience of doing all the things that I've had to do, and meeting people like you who are doing these amazing, amazing things. One of the things that we didn't really, I spoke about the work that I did with the youth, but again, going back to all the work about peace building, education, it all comes back to our future generations. We're doing this for them. Like, we've messed up this world, right? We've messed up this world. What can we do to make sure at least our children have a safer planet, and that they can have their experiences in a world that they cherish? All we can do is just share our experiences with them and hopefully guide them to be brave enough to go out there and do what they love.
Well, I feel like you have guided us on this journey for this past hour, and I'm truly grateful. And you may feel like you don't need your epitaph to be anything, but I feel like your beautiful life has been living the most beautiful epitaph every day. Thank you, Shirin.
Thank you for this opportunity and to have a chance to speak with you, Zoe, and all the things that you do that means so much and is so important for our future generations.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Solutionary Voices. I hope that you have been inspired by Shirin Karsan and that you will find somebody and look deeply into their eyes. And if you liked this episode, please share it with others. I invite you to subscribe, to write a review, and if you want to be a solutionary yourself, I invite you to read The Solutionary Way. Thank you so much.